section, I want to discuss the role of the literature review in your research. Oftentimes, students misconstrue how they deal with literature or how literature informs their study. Literature underpins study, especially at undergraduate level. Literature underpins most of your study because you are not really formulating new theory. However, you are applying theory or testing theory to see whether it applies in your context. So, research process itself, what is it? The research as we discussed in our previous segment, our previous lesson, starts with your research problem or research question. The RQ is a research question. Everything starts with a research question. So when you have a research question, what you do is, the first thing you do is you want to read around the research question to see whether anything has been uncovered to address that research question. So you start with your research question, you review the literature, review, and then you go back and you might rephrase the research question, reformulate the research question. However, once you read the literature, the way you read the literature is that when you are reading the literature, you find elements, what we call, you analyze, you read it in a critical, analytical manner. You find elements of the research question, and that leads you to research objectives. Yeah? The research objectives come out of the literature. As you read the literature around the research question, then you know that in order to answer the research questions, you have to address a range of research objectives. Now, how is this put together? When you write your literature review, it's not good just summarizing literature. You have to relate the literature to your research question. In effect, your literature should be divided into segments that are aimed with a research objective. So, that segment of the literature review, lit review segment, should naturally lead to a research objective. So if you have one objective, you will say, okay, this objective addresses or deals with these particular concepts. Let's start with our concept where we said motivation and performance. If that's what we started as our research question, we are saying motivated staff perform better than staff who are not motivated. We might, after we read the literature, find that there are a number of aspects that motivate an employee. One of them might be relationships at work. Yeah? One of them might be autonomy in doing their job. So the autonomy in doing their job. So the decisions they make, the extent to which they make decisions about their work. One of them certainly might be how their work is related to their interests, yeah, their personal interests. So you might say, okay, the objectives of your study after having read the literature around there would be to find out whether having good relationships with colleagues at work impacts on an employee's motivation and consequently on an employee's performance at work. And the other objective might be whether having the ability to make decisions about how you do your work impacts on an employee's motivation and hence their performance. And similarly, whether if the employee finds the job interesting, impacts on their ability to do the job, their motivation to do the job, and hence their performance. Now, how do you do the literature review? Your literature review, your first one will be looking at relationships and motivation. So your first bit of literature will be relationships and motivation as your first bit. So you look at literature around that, and that literature should naturally end with, therefore, having written about that literature, then you'll be saying, okay, literature has indicated that people who have good relationships at work are motivated to do their work or motivated to go to work and perform well. Therefore, one of the objectives of the study is to look at the relationship between motivation and having good personal interaction, personal relationships at work. So you see, you have reviewed the literature on that issue and ended up with an objective relating to that to the issue. Similarly, you review literature on autonomy and motivation and end up with an objective on that aspect. How does this help you? This helps you because, as you can see, that leads back to your research question through the objectives, but also it leads forward to your methodology, which is the next thing. Because how does it lead to the methodology? How it leads to the methodology is this way. If you talk about a relationship with colleagues, you'll be looking at how you measure, for example, or how you define relationship with colleagues. And that leads on to methodology. Because if you're doing quantitative research, you want to measure what is relationship. Is it just the number of friends you have, or the extent to which you interact with friends, like going out for meals? What is this relationship? So you will know how to measure that relationship in your methodology from the literature. Similarly, you know how to measure motivation, of course, because you have written how to measure motivation. So that leads on to your methodology in terms of your data collection. That literature has to inform the methodology. If the literature has no relationship to your methodology, then you haven't done the literature review properly. In summary then, what we have is, I know some of it will be cut off. In summary, what we have is, we have the research question. We have the lit review. And that is split into segments, which lead to the research objectives. Yeah? And then that leads to your methodology in terms of data collection, what type of data you collect, how you collect it, and of course the methodology has the usual elements of collection, analysis, presentation. You notice that in this presentation so far, I haven't talked about philosophy. Philosophy, what I find in most of students' work is that they talk a lot about philosophy, on ontology, epistemology, axiology, and those aspects, but they forget that the significant aspect of the methodology chapter is to tell the reader what data you are collecting, why you are collecting that data, from whom you are collecting that data, and whether that data is valid to. However, how do you bring in philosophy? You bring in philosophy as a consequence of your data collection. Not the philosophy doesn't drive your data collection. Your data collection is your research question. So what you have is, you might say, okay, I want to see the relationship between concept A and concept B. Because you want to see the relationship between concept A and concept B, the most appropriate way to deal with this research question is through measurement, because I will measure concept A and see whether, as concept A changes, concept B also changes. So because you are dealing with measurement, then you go back and say the philosophy underpinning this from an ontological perspective is objectivism. I have to be objective, yeah? And then I have to use positive instruments to collect this data. These instruments don't have to be influenced from an axiological perspective now, don't have to be influenced by me. I have to stand apart from the research and make sure that the instrument is what is important. And because the instrument is important in quantitative research, we are saying we have to ensure that the instrument is valid and it's measuring the correct thing that it says it's measuring correctly what it says it's measuring, and it has to be reliable so that when it's applied several times, we get the same answer.